Bilateral. And time. People, questions about homework too? It is out. Maybe we mentioned everybody is doing grads and undergrads. You'll use the same input files. You'll use the, and actually you don't need to worry very much about the format of the files. They are high definition, high dynamic range images, but you are getting already from Amir, the reader, that gives you an array of RGB, RGB, RGB as usual, except that now they are float. So take it into account when you are using this array. That every byte is 64 bytes or 128 if you are using long or short. Float. And the big difference between grads and undergrads is that grads don't need to worry about the halo region. The halo spots, halo effect. And that we'll discuss more today, why it happens. So undergrads don't need to, can do it for credit, and grads are requested to do it. And we are still in the question of dynamic range. I have an image that the input is very large. Here is my dynamic range that's, in my example, the minimum level, maximum level only, and to have your pixels are arranged along the x-axis. Every x point is a pixel, let's say one row of the image. And obviously to get two signals be visible to you to see the details at all, for 2 pixels, then there should be a gap of at least 1. When I'm doing the rounding or truncation, there should be a value of at least 1 between the contrast of the 2 pixels. Otherwise, I don't jump from one level of the pixels on my monitors that only have 256 values for each color. I will not jump from one energy level to the next energy level, next setting of the pixel. And as we said, we have small details that are in the input by itself enough to trigger pixel jumping, pixel level jumping. You would like to start the pixel when you're a bit to the right and a bit to the left. Don't worry about how many pixels. Your monitor in terms of resolution, spatial resolution, number of pixels is billion on billion. Don't worry about this one, just about the dynamic range. That's, I still limit that the RGB of each pixel are just between 0 and 256. This gap is gaps that I want to use, that there is enough much change over here or enough much change over here, that in most cases it's at least it's close to 1, but once I smear it, if I just compress the whole thing, then this gap, the local, what I called here the local contrast, would be scaled as well. And to put this whole function into this range, I have to scale it down by a factor of about 80 per. I scale it down by a factor of about 0.2, that it decreases the dynamic range from 100% to 20%. So if, as I showed you last time, if I do it universally on all the frequencies the same way, all these minor details are just vanish. What does it mean? That when you're looking at it, the image looks blurry. You think that there should be elements of the tree over here, but they don't. They all look the same because these little values have been scaled down, the values between these to this. What you do want to use altogether is that in this image, for example, we have slow change that goes from sky. Sky are always, even in sunset, sky are always the luminosity is very high, intensity is very high, highly illuminated, and the ground that is much slower with much lower luminosity, and the gap between them is kind of clear. I don't have many changes on the ground itself, and I don't have many changes on the sky itself in terms of the high-level bits. Am I here in my energy level? Am I here on my energy level? You have slow change from regions that you are low to regions that are high. Now, and the tiny little details that you see over here are very relevant. Now, of course, you can generate images that are bad for me for both aspects, that are very large gaps that change very fast, and for this way, the methods that we present doesn't work. Another example, the cafeteria window outside, highly illuminated, but again, it's one big region. It takes lots of the area of the image that is highly illuminated, and the background with all the details that are much less illuminated. Again, it doesn't change dramatically. Reflection of the window in the floor, still much higher luminosity than the walls, but changes slowly. One big region, not the tiny little details that jump black, white, black, white, black, white as you are walking over here. And that's why it makes sense to use smoothing. That is, I'll take my input image with all its details, what you see in green, my original input image. With green, I will look at the smoothing transformation, and smoothing here might be would be in general would be just, for example, the luminosity of x minus 1 plus the luminosity of x plus the luminosity of x plus 1. Take all of it and divide by third. That is, give the luminosity of each of these three values weight of 3. Now, I mentioned last meeting, and I'll re-mention that I'm doing all these gymnastics on the luminosity. When I start the gymnastic, I'll compute for every pixel, and that's what I ask you to do in the homework. For every pixel pi, compute the luminosity of pi, which would be roughly of r of pi plus g of pi plus blue of pi. And actually, you want to give them different coefficients because our eye is much more sensitive to green. So it makes sense that green is more important. And you have the exact formula in your homework. And that's a luminosity. And there is another little detail that I want to mention, that here I'm doing the operation as if it's linear scale, multiply the intensity by a constant and change it by a constant. You can do it, but what works better is actually to move from Li to Q of pi, which will just be log. You can take whichever base for the log you want. I wrote the homework when I used log to the base 10 of L of pi, and all the operation would be on the log. That is, what does it mean to multiply the log by a constant? If I look at Q of pi and multiply it by a constant gamma, let's say 0.3, no matter what I'll do, when it will be time to decide about the RGB value of pi, R of pi, G of pi, R prime, then RGB of pi prime. Prime will mean the new value. At this point, you recollect what is R of pi, what was the input, and you multiply it by a scalar. And what is a scalar? The scalar would be what was the original luminosity of pi. Luminosity, not the log of the luminosity. The luminosity of pi. What do I have in the numerator is the new luminosity of pi. That's exactly what we are computing right now. Are you lost already? Recap. I'll keep the three colors. They are the G of pi and the blue of pi. I still remember these three values, but I also compute the luminosity, the intensity. And there is many, many ways to decide what is exactly the intensity. We decide that it's some linear combination of the values of the RGB. Why? Because it works. And the exact constants appear in the homework. Our eye is really sensitive to difference in green, so green gets a lot of weight. We are less sensitive to difference of blue. Blue gets low weight. We are summing them up. We are dividing by some constant. That's the intensity. That's the luminosity. Why do I do this whole exercise? Eventually, I want to get to a constant that might be uniform for the whole image. That's just the gain. Or it can be sensitive that different pixels have different constants, but one pixel have the same constant for the three channels, for the RGB. Again, once you decided about the scale, then you're applying the same scale to the RGB, multiply the RGB by the same constant, and all this gymnastics that we are doing is just to get this constant. Go ahead.
Are you picking the new luminance? And then the L prime, how do you get that in order to calculate like R prime, G prime?
So one way would be to do linear shift. Forget about the log. Just multiply by the gain and shift by beta. It's a method. Another method is to do gamma correction. The same gamma, but on all the pixels. Usually when we'll say gamma correction on all the pixels, we'll say we are taking the old luminosity of each pixel. L prime of pi would be the L of pi. Prime here is not derivative. It's a new value. It's an old value to the power of gamma. It's another way. That's both. So we have gamma correction, again on the luminosity, and we have the gain and shift plays that you don't have to implement. Either way, these are operations that I can do uniformly on the whole image. Or I can say I'll be more selective about what are the operations that I'll do for every pixel, because to see the details of the pixel, I care more about the contrast between its pixels and its neighboring pixels. And again, because it works. So what I ask you all to do is to do the later. That is, you are using the separation for high frequency and low frequency, and that's how eventually I'll get to L prime of P. But jumping to the end, once I decided about the target luminosity, again, might be different between pixels, but and that's why this scalar or the ratio between L prime of pi, the new luminosity divided by the old luminosity, might be different between pixels. If it's the same for all pixels, if this ratio is the same, then it's just a gain part. Just multiply everything by 0.5. No, by 0.2. OK, now I have this ratio for this pixel, and I multiply, and you have it on the slide, I multiply by this constant L prime of p divided by L of p, and the same goes for the blue. So I treat the whole color, the three colors now. Again, I'm back to the RGB values. I don't care about logs anymore. I used the logs only to, when I made the gymnastic, to compute what is L prime of p. And the same constant for the blue. L prime of p divided by L of p. So in the GeoGebra, just for visualization, what did we do? I computed the Q of pi, which was the log to the base 10. Why log works better? Because our sensors works basically. If you think about, if I want linear something that to feel that the intensity of the light increases linearly, again, if I want to feel as if the intensity of the light increases linearly, I need to increase the actual energy that comes from the projector exponentially. That is, double the intensity, double the intensity, double the intensity. And to me, it will look like, and presumably for other humans as well, it will look like the brightness increases linearly. That is, to get the same change from 0 to 1, when you're moving from 1 to 2, you need to double the intensity by, not by 2, but by 4, and then by 8, and so on. So that's a hand wave about why the explanation works well. We got Q of pi, log of the base. And my question would be now, if I multiply Q of pi by some number gamma, and at the end of the day, no matter what I'll do to gamma, the L prime of pi, the new luminosity of pi, would be, if to get Q from L, I apply the log. To go to the opposite direction, what should I do? Exponent. I'll take 10 to the new value of Q prime of pi. Now, if I multiply Q of pi by gamma, how does it affect L of pi?
You tend to the gamma as well, then simplify that.
Sorry?
Would it just be 10 to the gamma Q prime?
It will be 10 to the gamma Q prime. But what is 10 to the gamma Q prime? Let's say that Q, I decided, because of all my calculation, that Q prime, the new Q of pi, would be 2 times Q of pi. The old Q, the new Q. And Q is a log. Now, what is the new L prime of pi? It is 10 to the power of, now, 2 Q of pi, which I can write as, I think that you all know where it's going. Which I can write as 10 to the power of Q of pi all of this to the power 2, 10 to the power of q pi, is also known as is L, the old L of pi, to the 2 over here. So if, remember, if q or q prime of pi was 2 times q of pi, then the impact on L will be, what happens to the q? It's going to the exponent. What happened to the gamma? To the 2, it goes to the exponent, not q. This 2 goes to the exponent over here. And if instead of 2, I'll replace it by gamma, instead of 2, I'll write some number gamma over here. I'll write gamma over here. Then what do I do to L? What is L prime of pi? It's the old L of pi, the old intensity, to the power of gamma, which is known as gamma correction. So multiply q by gamma is a gamma correction. Because that's exactly what we said, that gamma correction is. You take the signal and put it in value, in exponent of gamma. I don't reflect it in the GeoGebra part. So where are we? So the original function is q. We prefer to work on the log. I take q and I convolve it with a smoothing function. You can go fancy, use Gaussian. You can just use a box. Box kernel just gives the same weight to each one of the pixels around you, but giving third. Or since it's 2-dimensional, you probably want to look at the 9 neighbors. Or actually, it's better to look at the 5 by 5 or even more. And just give them all the same weight. So this is a function S that you can barely see passing right here. That's the average. But S is nothing but the average that you see passing in between the function. It smoothed it. Now I look at H minus F. Let's visualize this. Let's say that my original image jumps between 9 to 11. That's the intensity of my original function, jump from intensity of 9 to 11, to intensity of 11, intensity of 9, 11, 9, 11, 9. S just takes the average of each 3 points will be something like, at this point, I'm taking the average of 9, 9, and 11. The average is a bit closer to 9, so it's a bit lower going up, because the average of 11, 9, and 9 would be a bit lower, a bit higher, a bit lower, a bit higher, something like that. But agree? Much. It is the average between all these points, but each time I'm looking at a block of 3 points. So it's either 9 plus 9 plus 11, or 11 plus 9 plus 11 again, a bit higher. What is? This is S of H, the smooth function. age of x, the age for high, these are the high frequencies. This will jump from, what do I get here? I look at this point, ask, it's 11 minus the average, copy this part, put it on the 0. Here, my average is a bit lower. It goes a bit below, a bit above, a bit below. But they're all very close to, they're all in the range of somewhere between 0.6 to minus 0.6. Much less than what I get over there. And that's exactly what you see in age of x right here. And remember these high frequencies because we'll also use it later today talking about sharpening images. But that's what you see. This point comes because that's the value of the function very low, while the average is a bit higher. So f minus the function is negative number, but it goes over here. Cool, high frequency. I don't compress the high frequency. I don't multiply it by alpha. I don't squeeze it. I keep it as is. I want all these details. They're all great. These are the small little details that you see in this in the window over here, the small little details that you see over here. This stays the same. I have the smoothed function. Now I take only this smoothed function, the average, and I compress this one. We scale this one. Change alpha now. Change alpha until you'll fit the average right here. If alpha was 1, then this smoothed curve would be pretty much the original function. Here I need alpha, which is third. So this region even, not exactly, but start to be of the same order of magnitude. At the homework, you don't need to play with beta, actually. OK, just with alpha. And the actual alpha that you multiply it by after the exponent just becomes the gamma. I placed it over here in the right place. And now, how can I make the small details visible again? I will create a new the new function, and that's finally q, the q prime. That's a q that I'm going to generate. The new prime that I'm going to generate would be alpha times the smooth function. The smooth function compressed. The smooth values fit what your monitor can show in its dynamic range. That's where the alpha multiplied s. Beta, if you want to play with the bias, the bias just shift it up and down, plus age of x, the high value, the high frequency, sorry. The high frequency, not compressed. So sure, it will not look extremely real. Something looks a bit fake on this image, but yeah, you still have big ups and downs over there. And you're more than invited to play with GeoGebra before you start with the homework. But essentially, the new function is this red thing. And when I think about how it will appear in my monitor, remember, I need to jump from here to get an impact of 1. That is, that the image will look different at these 2 pixels only if I have a pixel in between that jumps up and down by at least 1 level. If all my changes stays in the same level, it means that you are getting exactly the same signal from your monitor over here. And you see that in this way, I still have much better chance to see all these details. So that's repeating plus explanation of pretty much what the undergrad needs to do. OK, and let's explain why is this a bad idea to do gamma correction, even if you don't want even the spatial decomposition. You don't want the spatial decomposition. You only want to get away with gamma correction. which you can do definitely. But why is it a bad idea to do gamma correction for each channel independently? If you're using gamma that is less than 1, the filling of a color is essentially determined by the ratio between how much R versus how much G do you have in the image. Again, the filling of a color, it's more green than blue, is determined by how much green divided by how much blue there are. Remember the calculation of how did we compute the angle in the HSV, the U of the value. To get the same filling, I want to keep the number, to keep the same ratio between R and G, to keep the color correctly. If I apply gamma to green separately, then I apply the gamma to the blue. Even if gamma is the same, the ratio between them change, which would create an image where all the colors are much less pronounced. It would look as a very dull image. Make sense? Multiplying it all by gamma just change the color and they are much less alive. That's why we do all the exercise about managing the intensity and only then use the intensity to rescale the colors. OK. So that's all an old technique, the spatial separation, going back to 68 of Oppenheim. Here is a low frequency, but we saw as a smoothed function, big blur of white area, big blur of darker area with some shade. High frequencies, much less extreme, but with many more spatial details. The spatial frequency is much higher. And the colors that you keep separately, as they are old RGB or the new RGB, doesn't have the intensity at all. OK, so that's summarizing Oppenheim algorithm. And now let's talk about the shorthand, the artifacts of this algorithm. And it was talking about the artifacts of this algorithm. I'll just point them out and we'll discuss the reasons and how to fix them separately. So look at what happens near the boundaries between regions here. Somehow there is these very intense spots. The same here, this hollow, nightmarish part, if you wish, that appears near the boundaries. And to understand why it appears near the boundaries, let's set our attention to GeoGebra once again. So here is my original signal. Here's my original signal, a bunch of points that are all more or less 12, somewhere between 12 and 11. And then I jump to a new point where these are jumping to be about 20. Set of points all around 12, set of points all around 20, and a very sharp edge between them. It clears it all the way up to x equal 12. I'm in the 12, up to x equal 10. I'm in the first region. For x equal 11 and north of it, I'm definitely in the 20 region, between 18 and 20. Clear? Now, I want to smooth it. I want to compute the smoothing operation of this function, like the average. Why? If it's a sound, I want to send it to my base, to my woofer, while the high frequencies are what I send to my tweeters. If it's image, I want to use smoothing to either increase the dynamic range, what you're doing in homework 2, or want to sharpen images, that I all use explanation, how does smoothing relates to sharpening images, all to come. And there is many other applications that relies on smoothing the image. So I want to smooth it. Smooth would be, for example, take every pixel and take the nearby pixels. That's box smoothing. What is a box smoothing? Box smoothing will say if x is either 0 or 1 or 2, or -1 or -2, absolute value of x is less than 2, then give it a weight of 0, of 1/5. This is, I'm going to sum up 5 pixels, so I'll give each one a weight of 1/5. Makes sense. And every other pixel will be 0. That is, if I want to smooth the value at 10, what do? I compute the average of the luminosity at 10, which is, what is this? 11.9 plus the 2 neighbors to the left plus the 2 neighbors to the right. Makes sense. That's if I'm doing box kernel. All the way are the same. I can also use other kernels. It will not change the overall effect. Just to show you the other kernels that I can use. I can use a tent kernel. Tent, the goal are exaggerated, but in this case, I only look at the neighbors, 2 values to the right and 2 values to the left. That's actually what matters, 2 numbers to the left or numbers to the right, including myself. So when I want to compute the value at this place, I still look at its own, 1 to the left, 2 to the left, 1 to the right, 2 to the right. However, the weight that I give all these nice gentlemen varies according to what's their distance for me. When I put the tent over here, then the max intensity would be, so for this element, less to its neighbors on the left and right. The same way I can use a Gaussian kernel. That would say, I'll give some weight to elements to the left, I'll give some weight to the elements on the right, but the way that I'm changing the weight depend on the Gaussian. The numbers that you cannot read right here is, this is e to the minus of x squared divided by sigma squared half. This function has great statistical applications that you don't necessarily need to know about in this context, but it's a smooth function. Right? And it just gives a weight of 1 at the top of the bell curve, top of the Gaussian, and for neighbors that are getting further away, I give less weight. Either way, I apply any of these 3 methods. But I don't use bilateral combination, and we have a bug. Is this because of this? Or OK, it worked with this one. Fine. And I looked at the back to the box. What happens at this value? This value is kind of acceptable, where the smoothing is. The smoothing is roughly at the same value, plus average to the left, to the right. Box means they all get the same weight. This number, maybe it's not the nicest, still jumping up and down, but it's kind of the average. But you see a few problems here. One problem is that near the boundaries, this guy doesn't have, this guy, x equal 1. What about at x equal 1? I can look at the value of the input at x equal 1. I can look at the 2 neighbors to the right. But from the left, I don't have enough many neighbors. I just don't have the input. So if I consider it as 0, then suddenly the average drops to 0. Or at least goes down. I want it to be somewhere associated with my function all the way. That's one problem. You see it also next to the other boundaries. But the other issue is I have clear cluster of points whose y value is roughly 10, and another cluster of points in the input where my value is about 10, another cluster where my y value is around 20. The boundary between them was, in the input data, very sharp. I want to smooth the function, but it doesn't mean necessarily that I want this border between the moving from one cluster to the other. See what happens to my smoothed function. It creates a very blurry gap between this cluster and the next cluster. But the smoothed function is going somewhere over here. And I don't want it. That's exactly the reasons for the halo region that I showed you in the previous image. Remember? We had the halo points that are exactly because when I did the smoothing, I didn't respect the boundaries between one region to the other. No. Can you see it over there? Oh, yeah. Alpha 1 f1 of x plus f of x minus 1 plus alpha 2 f of x plus alpha 3 f of x plus 1. And if I want a smoothing, we'll see today other way of other kernels. But if I want a smoothing part, averaging, then what did we say about alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha 3? They should sum up to be 1. But they need to be between 0 and 1 if I want some number. The output to be between 0 and 1. And I want them to be a convex combination. Alpha 1 plus alpha 2 plus alpha 3 should be equal 1. For example, third. Understand the third as I want the f of x will have exactly the same weight as f of x minus 1 in this case. The kernel in this example would be possibly 1 over 4, 1 over 2, and 1 over 4. That would be the 10th. 1 over 4, 1 over 2, 1 over 4. Understand it as when I compute the smoothing at x, I want to give a weight to f of x, which is twice as important as f of x minus 1 and twice as important as f of x plus 1. But now, what should I do if I just realize that I don't want in the summation, in the sum slash average? I just don't want to get rid of the third term. Why do I want to get rid of it? Few explanations. Possibly, I want to get rid of it because I'm just computing the smooth function. It's the last pixel, and there is no next pixel. One explanation. Or I want to get rid of it because I realize that f of x plus 1 is so far away from f of x, the gap between them is so large that it belongs to different region, different cluster, different area in the image, and I don't want it to smooth the boundary between these two regions. Make sense? I decided, for example, that f of x minus f of x plus 1, I'm at x. I'm computing s of x. I'm looking at f of x. That's a dominant term in my summation. I want to add to it f of x plus 1, but only if f of x plus 1 is in the same in the same region, in the same cluster as f of x itself. Otherwise, I'll just decide to delete it. So only if f of x minus f of x plus 1 in this example is less than 3. So I decided that I don't want the third term. OK. So what happens if I just sum these numbers with the other way of the tent, either the tent or the box? What will happen right now when I sum them up? I'll get a value that is quite likely to be smaller than both f of x and f of x minus 1. Right? Because I don't compensate for the sum of weights right now is not what is the sum of weights if I ignore these guys. Let's say that if the sum of weights was, if the original weights were third to each, and I just sum two of them, the sum of weights is not not 1, or less than 1. It will be kind of, well, then I have a lot of other options, but let's read it the way that I phrase it. The way, if I gave each of the weight of third, I mean that f of x should get the same weight as f of x minus 1. If I gave it weights of half and quarter, then f of x is twice as important as f of x minus 1. So what should be the prime alpha prime of x if alpha or alpha I is a new? So I need to do something with the weights, right? I cannot leave the weights dangling as it either are and expect it to be a smoothing function. I'll get much less than the smoothing if I just decided that some terms don't get any weights, are out of the summations. So I need to use new weights, alpha 1, alpha prime I, which would be what? Let's say in this example, what should be the new weight?
Alpha 1 plus 1 half alpha 3. Or like alpha I.
I think that you're right. But
The last alpha into the first two.
I think that you're right. I didn't think about it this way. I think that you're right in this way, but I'm not sure that it's the same. The suggestion is, what's my problem? The sum of the values, let's compute k of x, alpha 1 plus alpha 2 plus alpha 3. But k of x will be equal 1 if I use all three values. K of x would be only alpha 1 and alpha 2 if alpha 3 is out of the game. And alpha, the new alpha I at x, would be the old alpha I of x normalized by k of x. So if my original weight was quarter f of x minus 1 plus half f of x plus quarter f of x plus 1, and now I erased this term, then what are the new weights? This would be replaced by quarter divided by half plus quarter. The half comes from here. I sum up all the weights. And this weight would be half divided by half plus quarter. And in this way, when I'll sum up the ones that are still in the game, the values that I did not exclude, the weights will sum up to 1. Make sense? I mean, you could check it out. The weights in this case all sum up to 1. One sec.
So is the difference between bilateral and non-bilateral is just counting everything in the box versus not counting everything? Is it just a definition?
Yeah, in the bilateral, I also look at the values, at the numbers, and say there is another term that just don't put in the game values that I don't want, the f of x. We will see that it can be done by a new Gaussian, or it can be done by just I either sum it up or give it weight of 0. But either way, I need to multiply it by a third term. So results, here is, again, just a box function, but one advantage of, yeah.
How do you choose what values to ignore?
If I want user in the loop, I can decide if f of I mean, I'm looking at f of x. I'm computing the new value of f of x. Look around you. If you see pixels around you that are much stronger or much weaker than you, then ignore them. That's if you want to decide about threshold human decide. Slightly less human decide is to put a Gaussian that still sum up everybody, but the more it is different than mean y, the less weight I give to it, which is what Tomasi suggested in the papers that we are going to mention in a moment. But the idea is the same. I just wanted a bit less numbers. So here are, and I solved both problems because now I don't care that numbers here are close to the boundaries. I just ignore the non-existing points and I normalize the weights, the same point here. And the jump between the two boundaries is very nicely pronounced. I don't smooth the jump. And it will work both if I used the tent. Here, it's still not, it's nice in its range, but it's still very rough. If I use a Gaussian instead, then I can make it more smoothed, depending on sigma, depending on how sharp the Gaussian is, how sharp or how smooth. If I make it very sharp, then each data point by itself give itself a lot of points. If I make it even sharper, then the new integrations that are pixels that you can do as in homework 1, as anti-aliasing, you could have done. Anti-aliasing in between would have get 0 pixels because I'm just caring about values that are so close. If I'll make this tent a bit smaller. If I'll make the tent larger, kind of increase the standard deviation, then you see that the curve as a whole is smoother and smoother. It's more into average of a few, and it's very nicely canceled numbers that are too far away. But even in the Gaussian part, I don't sum up numbers that are too far away from me, no matter what's a kernel, what's a cost function. Cool?
So did you have to sample like the smooth bilateral at the Nyquist frequency for this? Like, is there a restriction on how often you must do it?
No. It's
Use the blue thing and there's a lot more.
the blue thing is probably what I would guess that it looks like, but of course, overdoing it will make it blurry when maybe you want to show some images. So I can definitely overdo it. I can definitely do it too much. Another advantage of doing it this way is that usually when you're using Gaussian, you want to normalize it by some numbers that tell you how many of these values will give exact weight of, so the sum of weights will be 1. In this case, so usually it's normalized by a constant times e to the power. Here I don't care about it. I'll use just a Gaussian with the original numbers, and since and my bilateral function will, for every value, just ask who are the numbers that I sum using the Gaussian. The Gaussian just tells me if somebody is 3 times the distance away from you, that you should give it much less weight than you yourself have. Okay, back to the slide. So we covered this one today of what gamma compression by itself. Here is the formula that I mentioned earlier. The new RGB default display would be the old RGB, each one scaled by the intensity that you want to assign to this pixel divided by the intensity that this pixel had originally. LD divided by LW is a scalar that scales all 3 numbers. And to remind you, log to the base 10 of x is 1. If you're adding something to the log, it means that it's the exponent part. You double, and gamma correction is gamma correction. OK, back to the halo nightmare. Not my terminology. Why is it suddenly so bright and so unnatural? Because even though this region is in the illuminated, highly illuminated region, it's counted as low luminosity because it's close to the nearby. Right? This pixel close to the dark part, so it's considered as dark, even though this pixel by itself, the average around this pixel is dark, even though this pixel by itself, it's a halo, is clearly in the very bright region. How can I get rid of it? I'll just sum up for this pixel only very illuminated, high illumination pixels, and inside the tree, I'll only sum up other pixels that are inside the tree. Yeah?
Why around the tree is it even brighter, not just blurry? Like, I would understand why it gets blurry, because you're averaging it.
Thinking about it as dark region, for the tree, I'm trying to, I'll say if I'll show the tree as is, it will look too dark, so I increase it. I play with gamma, so I increase it. So the tree itself gets more light, essentially. Having the pixel nearby registered as semi in the tree, it gets more light that it deserves just to show natural. It gets more light, and this extra other light that doesn't come from the image itself. So I push it above the average. Excellent question. OK, so our approach, we went through it. Examples of the kernels that you can use if it's in 3D. Gaussian, e to the minus, that's just a formula of the Gaussian in 2D. Use a cone, one example of the tent, just with radial symmetry, or use another cone that is just about all of them. They are all legit. At the homework, I'm just asking you to compute, to use it. You can just use a box, as simple as it is. 5 points, A, B, C, D, E. Once again, I compute the average. The average at B is third times A, third times B, third times C. But the average of C would be third times A plus third times B. Take whatever you got as a new value and divide it by what's the sum of weights that I accumulated from here. So I divide it by, thanks to our time for a new projector, obviously. So what's written over there is that the S of C is third of Y of B plus third of Y of C. What about Y of D? I decided that Y of D should not be in the game because I only accumulate values that are close to the value of C. The value of C is 1. Value of D is way too high. I don't want it in the game. So I divide all of it by the sum of weights that I did accumulate, 1 over 3 plus 1 over 3. That is, take the summation and do the division, and you're happy. So what do we call it bilateral function? Well, we are adding a new function, g, where g of L, let's try to increase it a bit. I just wrote it down because in the slide itself it's coming as a bit of a surprise. There is g of L is a function that says, for example, if z is smaller than 3, the gap between two values is smaller than 3, then I'll give it 1, accepted. Otherwise, if it's more than 3, I'll give it weight of 0. K of P, we had it all beforehand, K of the pixel P is the sum of weight at P and the sum of weight of all the P prime near P, P prime which are near P, times, that's why it's bilateral, that's a new term, this G function that looks at the intensity of X and look at the intensity of P and ask, did you cross the barriers that you want about the intensities themselves? Is a level of the intensity themselves between P and P prime, it should be P here and P prime, is the difference between P and P prime is more than it is. It's not how far away geographically the pixel is from you, it's what is your brightness, your intensity, versus your intensity of a pixel that wants to be counted in the average, but assumably belongs to different parts. So K of P will be the normalization function, just sum up all the weights that are in the game, just sum up the 1 over 4 plus 1 over 2 in this example. And now the average at X is the sum of L of P prime is near X, of the weight of the that I give to this function, divided by K of P, the normalization factor, the sum of all the weights. What does G gives me over here, looking at the gap between the two luminosities, and G can decide, hey, I don't want it in the game, it's too far away. G measures if the difference between this intensity, Z over here, is more than 3, don't sum it up. Sum it up as 0, but then its weight will not contribute anything to the sum of weight. Cool, people? Okay, so this slide is a bit scary when we look at it originally. Just a copy of the slides. Oh, by the way, I also added here. What you see here are K of P. What is the sum of all the weights? Normal pixels, the sum of all the weights sum up to 1, normally. What is the sum of weights if I'm near the boundaries? If I'm near the boundaries between two regions or near the boundaries of my image as a whole, the sum of weights, there are elements that are not counted, so the sum of weights will go down to maybe 0.77 if it's third and third. Something that is less than 1 near the boundaries or moving from one boundary to the other. Okay, we had it already, so need to head a wrong slide. So visualization of the whole process. Visualization of the whole process. If you see it first time, that's Xi. Let's say Xi. How do I compute the average value at a point X? I let Xi wander around all the points near X, sum up all the weights value, all the heights, all the luminosities, sum up all the weights at all the points near X. Xi is running in the neighborhood of X. That is, and give it weight, and the weight is determined when Xi x is just in the middle of the Gaussian and xc is near x. The further xc is away from x, the less weight you're getting. But so now when you're taking the intensity in this slide, it's I times the weight that I give to this point. What happened to the boundary between these two regions? The boundary is becoming much less pronounced. Right? It was complete cliff originally, and now the slope is much less pronounced because you are again averaging in between parts that you prefer not to pronounce. Okay, so a cliff convoluted with a Gaussian will give you, it will look like the valley over here will look like the high level over here, but in between you'll get the boundary blurred. So to fix it, what do we do? To fix the hollow points, what do? We are letting, again, xc running through all the points, xc running at all the neighborhood of x, xc is running all between, sum up the average of the intensity, f of x of xc, but here is a new term, g that we had earlier. And g can be just, you know what, if I of xc and I of x, the intensity of x, the intensity of xc, are too much of your liking, give it a weight of 0. So it will be either 0 or 1. And that's fine, because in k of x will be used based on the same formula. Or Tomasi and Mendusi suggest use a Gaussian. So points that are just, but it's Gaussian, not spatial. It's Gaussian about how far away the intensity levels are. Okay. So that would be the new function. And since there are f of x's that don't sum up to 1, you don't give them any weights, compute k of x, which is just the sum of the values near x, the sum of the weights only near x. Okay. So essentially what you did is, without applying any AI or any segmentation to decide that these two regions are separated, the function miraculously decided that the right convolution is to convolve just the top part with a Gaussian that essentially looks like chopped Gaussian. It doesn't give any weights to points that are on the left side of the cliff. And it's nice because you didn't need to do any high level. You could have, but you didn't need any high level segmentation of the image into what is the right regions of what. And again, when it works, and of course, you can get a lot of images that it would not work. K of x, a lot of letters. That's why I wanted to prepare you in stages. K of x is look at all the x's that are around x, all the xc that are around x. F of x and xc is one Gaussian or tenth or a block function that said if x and xc is where I sampled, x is when I want to compute. If xc is too far away from x, don't give it any weight. That's based on the geographic distance. G looks at the intensities, the gap of the intensities, and maybe said, based on the intensities at xc and x, I will not give it any weight either. Cool. And when it all works, a summation of the whole part. So undergrad should implement this into the smoothing. The only difference is in the smoothing, one more parameter to look at into the smoothing. And this slide summarized it. And here is this beautiful image, perfectly corrected. Questions? I'm sure that you'll have more when you play with it more. And I want to show you in the last 6 minutes, just to start, to play a bit with a sharpening. I told you already, and we have it in the slides. I just will not pull. I will pull the slides. Why not? I will not pull the slides. Let's look at F right here. F is what you see in blue. It's nicely defined as it is 1 for any x that is less than 11. Then it goes linearly, that's F, all the way up to x equal to y equal 6. This value is, how to see, it's 6. And from 6, it changed linearly. That's the original image, and it might appear on the film. That's why it's so cool. It might just appear on the film this way. And you might decide that what you see over here is actually boundary between two regions, but because of my lens wasn't exactly in the right focus, I get some blurriness that explains why it's slowly changing, where I want the edges to look much sharper. You probably have very similar technique in your cell phone, by the way. So what are we doing? The original image is blurry to start with, so I'll do the only thing that I can do, which would be to make it even more blurry. Somehow paradoxal. I look at S of x, which, just like before, compute for every x. The smoothed value of x is, for every x, look at 1 or 2 neighbors to the left, 1 or 2 neighbors to the right. Sum them all up. And that's a value for every x. Again, here I used continuous functions, so I always sum up all the elements. And to be precise here, S of x equal f of x plus f of x plus delta plus f of x minus delta. All of it divided by 3. And remember, my goal is to sharpen the edge between them. That my image will look like the slope of this edge is higher. So I know how to get the smoothed function. That I can generate by essentially create another film, just more blurry. Now here is S of x, f of x. And now for every value of x, x equals something, x equals 16, I look at f of x minus s of x. And assume everybody agrees that s of x should go down, because the function goes down, it should proceed going down, and it should be above the function, above f, over here, just making the average. Everybody agrees? I can, by the way, if just to show you the impact of changing delta, if I make delta quite small, you see that a point inside the slope will just take the average. Delta is how far away I'm looking at the average. I'm only all the points of the smoothed area will be on the slope itself, right? But I'll still get the same effect. I can look at elements further away or smaller away, both legit. And now look at the high frequency. What is a high frequency? The high pass. Look at f of x minus s of x. The function minus the smoothed, the averaged function. The function minus the smoothed value at this function. And when this gap goes, if my slope goes down, then f of x minus s of x, you see it over here, it's a positive value. This is f of x minus s of x. also called the high frequencies. Similarly, goes down when I'm moving from straight slope to uphill, then f of x will be negative. Because if you think about it, h of x is behaving. The slope is changing from 0 to something larger. That's why the overall range of change should be, actually ignore last sentence. It's a minus of the function that is a second derivative. Anyhow, now I'm doing a new trick. I'm taking f of x. I'm taking f of x, and I'm adding it. I'm adding the high frequency. Again, taking f of x, add to it h of x, and you might want to multiply h of x by some number, alpha or 0. Let's start when it's 0. When it's 0, what do I do? Add to f of x? Nothing. So this corrected function that you see over here is just the original function. But what happens to this function when beta is slightly larger than 1? I'm taking the original function, and it's the lower part of the curve, I'm adding to it something which is negative, so my corrected function will go even lower, a bit unnatural. Now it makes a much sharper jump to this point. Why is this higher? Because I added to it, h of x was higher at this point, and I added to f something positive, so I'm getting higher. So this is a much sharper edge, and it's even higher pronounced by higher and lower intensities. And you can play with different betas over here, right? You can make it all the way more pronounced, less pronounced, but that would be the impact. If this would be s of x, and I'm adding to it h of x, I would just, what's the intuition? If I'm looking at s of x and adding to s of x, s of x plus h of x brings me back to the original function. So if you already get to the original, then try to get even further away to the direction that you went from s to f. Again, think about the direction that you go from s to f and continue a bit further. Then you'll get into a higher function. When my slope changes negatively, you'll get to a lower value when my slope changes positively. And in between them, this edge is much sharper. The more dramatic change, and change which is larger and larger slope. And the beauty was that it's an invention that comes way before computers. You can do it, the whole process, just by playing with two films that you're putting on one to each other and playing with negative. So it's a very old invention. But again, and there is no high-level intelligence of trying to decide what are the edges here. Where should I, there is no clustering of this region versus this region to decide that I don't change them. I don't change them just because what is age at this point, edge of this point, where it's the same value, then the s is exactly f, and f minus s is 0. So I don't add anything. I didn't make any different decision here versus a decision here, but just because my function changed, all this magic happened. Cool. Thank you. Bye.